but I'll read these one after the other in order. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who embrace her. Those who lay hold of her will be blessed. By wisdom the Lord laid the earth's foundations. By understanding he set the heavens in place. By his knowledge the deeps were divided, and the clouds let drop the dew. Do not withhold good from those who deserve it when it is in your power to act. Do not say to your neighbor, come back later, I'll give it tomorrow, when you now have it with you. Do not plot harm against your neighbor who lives trustfully near you. Do not accuse a man for no reason when he has done you no harm. Do not envy a violent man or choose any of his ways, for the Lord detests a perverse man, but takes the upright into his confidence. When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. When the wicked perish, there are shouts of joy. Through the blessing of the upright, a city is exalted, but by the mouth of the wicked, it is destroyed. He who is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward him for what he has done. The righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern. What we're going to see today, I hope, is at the heart of what the book of Proverbs has to tell us is that in order to live a wise life, we need to care about justice. The topic of justice has received a great deal of airtime, especially over the last handful of years, and oftentimes leads to polarizing views and generates some heated debate and some angst. But today we're going to look at what God has to say about justice, regarding justice. That last verse I just read where it says, the righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no concern. That little word caring is far too weak an English word to get across what's actually being said there. The Hebrew word there is yada, which means the most deep and intimate experiential word in the Hebrew language that exists for knowledge. In fact, in the King James Version of the Bible, in the first few chapters of Genesis, Adam knew his wife, yada his wife, and she bore him a child. Knew there is the same Hebrew word yada that we're talking about here, and it's a knowledge that was so passionate, so intense, so intimate that it was a synonym, if you will, for sexual activity, and that's the word being used here. So what Proverbs 29 verse 7 is actually saying is, you are not wise unless you are living an intensely passionate life committed to justice. So let's figure out today what commitment to justice would look like by asking a few questions. We're going to ask the why, what, who, and how of justice, and we'll answer those in turn. So here's the first one we're going to tackle. Why do we need justice? And we'll be focusing on Proverbs 3 there on the screen. And critical to understanding justice is this concept of shalom, that the world was made in wisdom for shalom. So Proverbs 3 in verse 17, her ways are pleasant ways and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who embrace her. Those who lay hold of her will be blessed. Now, unfortunately, here again, we suffer a little bit in English. The English word blessed doesn't mean a lot for us. When someone says they've been blessed, it means like some good happened to them. They got an unexpected little thing they liked. They were blessed. But speaking in this proverb of wisdom, where all her paths are shalom and peace and all take hold of her are blessed, the word blessed and even the word peace, they're really powerful words in the Hebrew Scriptures that they don't come across in the English language at all like what they truly mean. Because blessed in English, as I said, means to be kind of feeling good, and peace just means this little bit of inner calm. But shalom and blessedness, which are often almost interchangeable in the Hebrew Scriptures, are far deeper and richer in that. You may ask, well, in what way? Well, we notice if we keep reading in that proverb in verse 19 about blessedness and shalom, by wisdom the Lord laid the earth's foundation. By wisdom he set the heavens in place. By wisdom, his understanding, he set the heavens in place. I read that already. By his knowledge, the deeps were divided. So God divided and designed things. The wisdom of God is how he created the world. So the world's not this hodgepodge. The world has an order and a design to it. God didn't just take up billions and billions of little entities and just kind of throw it all out there, but he beautifully and interdependently and harmoniously knit all that together. And all that harmonious knitting together is what the Bible means by shalom. Okay? You can understand that with your physical body. When you're young, Everything's generally good. You look good, you feel good, you're healthy, you got energy, you can sleep at night. Never knew how difficult it would be to sleep at night until I got into my late 50s. And so you have that when you're young. Why? Because every part of your body is knit together to every other part, and it's working in unity and in harmony. But then any kind of disease or injury or just aging itself causes all that to break down, and that breaking apart of what ought to be together. So when we experience disease or injury, we're just getting older and aging, we're losing the experience of shalom in our bodies. Similar things can happen with shalom emotionally or spiritually or mentally with us. When everything's aligned and designed and functioning as it should, and you have shalom, you're absolutely flourishing. Everything's knit together, for example, emotionally or spiritually or mentally. But if there's conflict or sin or trauma, then there's a loss of shalom. There's an unraveling of what God has knit together, analogous to that unraveling of kind of our physical bodies that we might experience. And when that happens, what do we experience? We experience anxiety, inner conflict, turmoil, angst, or anger, and you're losing shalom. There's even social shalom. Maybe you grew up in a neighborhood or been part of a neighborhood where everybody cared about everybody else on the block, where if you had a need of any sort, everybody was there for you. Or you needed to move something or were moving in, everybody was there for you. Or you had to go to the hospital, people were there for you and the meal trains were running. Or you had a financial need, people were supporting you. You had a neighborhood or community, if you had that brought you social shalom. Just living in the same geographic area doesn't automatically bring that, right? It's much more naturally in our present day to be independent, not connected to others, not interwoven socially or financially. And rather than spending time with each other and investing time and talent and efforts into the lives of people around you today, self-included, we're more prone to be selfish and not be knitting together strong community fabric. When people live their lives only for themselves, you have loss of shalom, which unchecked can progress to social breakdown, poverty, racism, crime, and more. That's the reason why shalom is what God made the world for. And it's a beautiful and powerful and incredibly rich concept. It's in that wisdom of knitting everything together harmoniously, how he designed creation. So you can see this concept is far more than peace, just feeling calm on the inside, or even peace, having a quiet mind, or even peace, a ceasefire among enemies. It's far more than that. It means universal flourishing, or wholeness, or delight. As one commentator wrote, he says this is shalom, a rich state of affairs in which natural needs are satisfied and natural gifts fruitfully employed, all under the arch of God's love. In other words, shalom is the way the world ought to be. And if we want to be living wisely and not foolishly, we need to discern God's wisdom in this, in the order of the world. We need to seek the interconnectedness or interwovenness of life and then act accordingly. Part of acting accordingly is just don't do things that damage that interwovenness or interconnectedness. A lot of Proverbs talk about, say, for example, the wise man or wise woman doesn't lie. They tell the truth. Well, why is that? Well, when you lie, you begin to unravel the social fabric around you, which distances you from others and may harm others. But when you tell the truth, you're weaving good threads into the fabric of those around you. In a similar way, the Proverbs talk about the wise man or woman being generous with their time and money. So what if you're going to be wise, don't spend 99% of your money on yourself. Spend 10 or 20% on other people. Give it away to family, to friends, to neighbors, the church, the poor. And when you see a community of people doing that, and it helps strengthen the interwovenness and interconnectedness, and it builds a strong fabric in the community. That's what a wise man or woman wants to see happen. They don't just tell the truth, they're not just being generous because it's morally good to do so. They do it because it strengthens the fabric of the shalom of the world order and of their community. Not doing so would be foolish. So wisdom understands this interconnectedness and this interwovenness. And so wise people focus on that. They seek to create that, to maintain that, to sustain that. And as we'll see in a moment, justice is basically putting it back. Where there's unraveling, we seek to get in there and fix what got unraveled. But suffice it to say, the reason we need justice is that the world was built for shalom. But we know it's unraveling everywhere. And so the work of justice is to go physically and spiritually and psychologically and socially and materially into those places where it's unraveling. And the only way we can do that is to inject ourselves into the lives of other people and spend ourself, our time, our money, our talent, our emotion on others. And what that does is it pulls them back up, the ones who are weak, the ones who are in need, and it weaves them back into the shalom fabric. So far, what we know, just from these couple verse Proverbs we look at according to the Bible, according to the book of Proverbs, the world was created for shalom, and therefore justice is restoring shalom to places where it's begun to unravel. Well, what about this next question? What is justice? A little further down in chapter 3 there, when you hit verse 27, do not withhold good from those who deserve it when it's in your power to act. Do not say to your neighbor, come back later, I'll give it tomorrow, when you now have it with you. Now, this is very sweeping. So as we dissect this a little bit, it's kind of, the first part's kind of simple, I think, on the surface. Don't withhold good from your neighbor. Okay, I kind of understand that, I think. But being good here doesn't mean just being nice in general and smiling and waving at people as you drive down the street of your neighborhood. It's not that. It actually means, the good here means tangible goods, material goods, money, tools, whatever your neighbor needs to flourish socially and economically. And so if you have an elderly neighbor and they can't clean their house, and maybe that's leading to some problems because maybe they don't have the money to do it, you help out. If you have neighbors who can't afford decent housing, if you have neighbors who can't get their kids into college, if you have neighbors without the goods, and you've got more of those goods than they do, then it's your responsibility to help out. That's kind of the spirit of the Scripture. And the responsibility isn't just to share it, it's to then weave your life in there with them in the sharing. You know, when we think of justice or even hear the word justice, or at least for me, I typically think going to court to get something rectified, to settle a matter legally, and that's really more civic justice. But what we're seeing in the Bible here in these Proverbs is the Bible's idea of justice is so much more. It is doing those things I just mentioned, but it's far broader and more comprehensive than that. It means that you not just be a thread next to other threads. It means when you see other people falling out of the fabric who don't have the goods, who are, have these needs, who have to fend for themselves, but they're not able to do that, that it's our job, my job, your job, our responsibility to get involved with them and weave them back into the fabric. But if you're like me, so often we don't want to be involved. I just don't have the emotional capacity to do that, or the financial capacity. And besides, we're so busy. To which God would say, too bad. You have to get involved. You have to. I have to. We all have to. We have to thread ourselves, our money, our time, our effort, our love into the lives of people weaker than us and the ones that have fewer goods than us. It's our responsibility. And it actually gets even stronger than that with regard to this. And I couldn't believe it when I first read this, as I looked at a couple of lexicons to look at some of the words in these passages. But where it says, do not withhold good from your neighbor who deserves it. I'm like, okay, hold on. It seemed to me, if I'm just kind of observing people out there in general, and there's some undeserving and deserving people, I just go help the deserving people. And the undeserving, and like, okay, well, how do I make a decision? Deserving, undeserving. But after looking up at a few lexicons, it's a little difficult to translate. The best translation of deserve is owner. So let me go back and restate what it's saying here with that word inserted. Your neighbor who doesn't have as many goods as you owns your goods. Well, wait a minute, what? And I checked and I double-checked. You can go study it yourself if you want, but I believe what it's really saying is, if you've got things that your neighbor doesn't have, give them to him because you owe him. He has a claim on your goods. He owns your goods as much as you do. Which as Americans, we're like, heck no. Like, what? Wait a minute. Haven't you heard of private property? And okay, well, of course, the Bible talks about private property. It does say thou shalt not steal. So some things belong to you. Okay. The Bible understands private property. But it doesn't have anything, the Bible, about this American individualistic understanding that we typically have about life. And here's why. Think about it. There's a lot of kids growing up today, as an example, in neighborhoods. And because they're growing up in those particular neighborhoods, they're going to grow up functionally illiterate. And you could think of examples of that anywhere. Inner city America, other places around the world, third world countries, whatever. And by the time these kids are 16, 17, 18, can hardly read or write at all, maybe not at all. So not only do they not have any marketable skills perhaps at that point, but then they don't have the literacy that will enable them to go get those skills, and thus their economic, social future is kind of bleak, right? Why? Well, I said a little bit about this last week. The liberals may say it's because of socially unjust structures. The conservatives may say it's the breakdown of the nuclear family. But almost nobody says in these discussions out there that it's the kids' fault. Nobody says it's the kids' fault. And here's the answer why the kids are in that condition and why people don't say it's the kids' fault. It's because they were just born into that. And they weren't born into your family. At some level, the 3 kids that were born into my family, Dawn and I, have a 200 or 300 times better prospects for economic and social success just because they were born to us. And they weren't born in Tibet, or they weren't born in some inner city community. But there's a shalom of the world that's unraveling in those places because the world it's incredibly inequitable. The distribution of opportunities and resources, we know it's highly imbalanced. And therefore, if you happen to have been born in a place, or you happen to have the breaks, you happen to be in a situation where you got the goods, if you will, the world, if you don't share those goods with those who don't have them, it's not just stinginess, it's injustice. Third question, who needs justice? We looked at why do we need justice, what is justice, but who does justice? Who are the people that carry it out? What does that look like? That's Proverbs 11 that we read. Let's reread it in verse 10. When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. When the wicked perish, there are shouts of joy. Through the blessing of the upright, a city is exalted, but by the mouth of the wicked, it is destroyed. Okay, so what's this describing? Well, first of all, it's describing a group of discrete people, right? There's this discrete group of people, the righteous or the upright. They're ones who have prospered in the city. And this word prospered here is a strong word that means they've risen to the top somehow. They become absolutely successful. They've risen to the top of their fields. They have wealth. They have influence. They have some degree of power in the city. But what's interesting here is for these people, the rest of the city don't resent them. The rest of the city isn't envious of them. In fact, the rest of the city rejoices in their success. I find that amazing. It's describing a scenario where there's a group of people who are of such character that when they get to the top like that, and they have that degree of success, and they're at the top of their professions, and they got some influence and power and wealth in the city, everybody exalts because it feels like a victory for all of them. Because those people aren't selfishly keeping it all to themselves. And so it's a victory for all of them. These people are the righteous people. Now, when we first think about righteous or righteousness, righteous kind of carries a negative connotation, I think. Self-righteous, or someone who's rigid or dogmatic or unyielding. And when we think of a righteous person, we usually think of a morally upright person. But that's not what it's talking about in this passage. That would not be enough to make a whole city rejoice, just that you happen to be morally good. So what is it? No, the Hebrew translated righteous means those who are willing to disadvantage themselves to advantage the community. Let me read that again. Righteous are those who are willing to disadvantage themselves to advantage the community. And over again, the book of Proverbs defines righteous that way. kind of by that definition, say, hey, I'm advantaged, but I will disadvantage myself to advantage others who are disadvantaged. While the wicked, on the other hand, are those who put their own economic and social and personal needs ahead of everyone else in the community. This is so convicting. When I was reading this and studying some of this, I'm just like, man, I am cut to the heart by this. This is a tall, tall calling. How much of my time am I spending on myself? How much of my energy? How much of my money? How much of my effort? If I was able to put it on a spreadsheet and tally it all up, create a little pie chart, how much really is others focused? Maybe another way to ask the question is, am I the kind of person, or is my family the kind of family that everyone else in my neighborhood looks at me or looks at us and says, hey man, I don't know if I believe what they believe. I don't have their faith. I don't have their religion. But I would shudder to think what our neighborhood would be like without them. They are injecting so much value into whatever, the community, the neighborhood, the workplace, that I don't know how we would replace them. That's the type of righteous folks the proverb is talking about. And the result is the rejoicing of all those around those righteous people. How about if we did that as a church? You know, what kind of church we have to be for those who maybe don't have faith, they don't care about our faith, but wow, for the people who know us and know us as a church would shudder. Man, I don't know what the city would be like, our neighborhood, our community, our workplace, whatever would be like without the Denver Church of Christ. They're injecting so much value into our community, I don't know how we would ever replace them if they weren't here. It's important for us to grow internally here inside this room and spread the gospel and teach and share the gospel and see salvation for more and more and more folks. But that's insufficient in and of itself. Our Christianity has to get outside these walls too. You notice it doesn't say when the righteous prosper, the righteous rejoice. It's not about the righteous prospering and then they themselves, man, pat myself, I'm so fired up with myself. I worked hard. Look at what I got. I pulled myself up by my bootstraps and man, I was so righteous just to do it right and yay me and I'll just rejoice with myself. That's not what it says. The city, others rejoice at the righteous who have that power and influence. We need to be, in ever-increasing measure at church, in a people who find parts of our community they're unraveling, and then we choose to thread ourselves into them. The more we do that, the more the community and folks around us will rejoice that we're in their midst. So now, if you, like me, when I was preparing this, are feeling guilty about any of this, let me encourage you to do this. Stop. And you know why? Because guilt puts pressure on you from the outside without changing you on the inside. Guilt puts pressure on you from the outside, but that's not going to make you any more one of those who go out then and do justice. You need to be changed from the inside, which brings us to our last point. How can we become someone who does justice? How can you and I get that? We can do that, I believe, by looking and grasping our last verse. It's wonderful and it's simple and it's practical. Chris Reed, the evangelist who leads the church in Salt Lake City now, who invited me into the ministry and trained me in my early ministry years, would always say of the Proverbs, painfully practical Proverbs. That was his kind of little phrase, you know, and as I was even just looking at these Proverbs last week, this week, upcoming week, they're practical, but they're painful too, and that's by design from God. But there's a principle in our last proverb here today, Proverbs 19, verse 17, that I think will help change you on the inside. It says, he who is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward him for what he has done. And so when we read that, kind of at first blush, there's just this simple promise. He who is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he'll be rewarded for what he has done. Okay, I kind of get that. It's a little bit tit for tat kind of thing. Do this, get this in return. Okay, seems to make sense. But banks do something, and maybe you've heard of this term before. Let me try to describe a little bit deeper what's going on in this proverb. Banks still tend to redline lower income communities, right? Something they're not supposed to do, but they do. They're not allowed to do it legally, but they still do it. And I wasn't even familiar with this concept until the first year of COVID. And one of the brothers here, Carlos Ortega, suggested a Netflix documentary that I watched on this. And so as I learned a little bit more about redlining, when a bank redlines a lower income community, it means that when someone from a lower income community asks for a loan, the bank just knows the statistics. And they know that that type of person is more likely to miss payments or default on the loan. So they make it very difficult for people in those communities to get loans. Okay? So here's what God is saying to you and me in this regard. Don't you redline anybody. Don't you dare look at someone and say, that person is a black hole. Don't you look at somebody and say, man, if I get involved with that person, I'm just going to give and help, and they're just never going to get any better. Don't redline anyone, I think is what God would say, because a gift to the poor is not really ultimately a gift to them, and not even ultimately a gift to get them to change per se. It's a gift to God. And God will enrich you one way or another. God will make good on the loan, if you will. That's an incredible promise, right? Do you have anybody in your life that you keep trying to help and they just don't ever get any better? Do you have anybody you know you're just trying to help and you've been doing it for years and years and years, like, man, this is a black hole of just sucking everything out of me. My money, my time, my emotion. Of course, we all do. And God says, don't you dare redline them. God says, don't do that. Because everything you're giving to them, when you give to the broken, you give to the poor, you give to those who are suffering, you're giving to me. It could be a stranger, it could be a brother or sister you're helping, it could be someone, just a neighbor, someone you're reaching out to and helping, someone you're sharing the gospel with, any or all those things. And God says, I will make the loan good. Don't worry, I am no one's debtor. No one has ever given to me more than I've given back to them. But there's even a deeper principle here we'll end on. And it's this: God identifies with the poor. He identifies, God himself, with the poor. We see it in the proverb. We see it elsewhere in Scripture. And one of the elsewheres we see it in Scripture, probably most vividly, is in Matthew 25. And I'll just paraphrase here. Jesus tells us in Matthew 25, in Judgment Days, God's going to sit in a throne. We're all going to come stand before him, and he's going to look at some people, and he's going to say some of the following phraseology. I was hungry and thirsty, and you didn't give me anything to eat or drink. I was a stranger or immigrant, if you will, and you didn't give me a home. I was naked and threadbare, and you didn't give me clothes. I was sick, and you didn't heal me. I was a prisoner, and you didn't visit me. And, of course, everybody who's listening to him is like, what? What are you talking about? Jesus, when did we see you thirsty? When did we see you naked? When did we see you a prisoner? When did we see you hungry? When did all that happen? And Jesus says God is going to say all this on the last day, that when you walk by those types of people in this life, you were walking right by God, for he was in them. And it's so tempting to walk on by. But if we're poor in spirit, and if we grasp that God doesn't redline us, if you know that even though you don't qualify for the loan, God invested in you and is investing in you, and you're saved by grace, then you'll become more motivated from the inside to do something to help those people that you may have wanted to simply walk on by. God identifies with poor in the Proverbs, but it's only when we get to Jesus in the New Testament do we see the full extent of that. God did not just come and identify with them and help them and engage the poor and oppressed. He became those things himself. Jim Boyce, he's a guy many years ago in the city of Philadelphia that I lived in for roughly 13 years on 2 occasions. He was a preacher and preached a sermon entitled The Illegalities of Jesus' Trial. And what he points out is that what's intriguing, he went back and he looked at Jesus' trial and he checked out all the Roman customs and Jewish rules, if you will, of jurisprudence. And he discovered that what happened to Jesus, everything was illegal. The arrest was illegal. The interrogation was legal. The trial was illegal. It was illegal for it to be held late at night. It was illegal there was no notification in advance. It was illegal that Jesus was not allowed any defense. It was illegal that Jesus was smacked and struck in the middle of the trial. And on and on and on. Everything reeked of injustice. He was the ultimate victim of injustice. And Christianity is the only religion in the world that claims its God had been subjected to injustice. And then you ask, and where have you really seen the Lord of heaven, naked, thirsty, a prisoner? You see him when you see him on the final day, on the cross. And when you see Jesus on the cross taking the place of the poor, taking the place of the victims, of the oppressed, of the casualties of injustice, and when you see him saying, I deserve justice but got condemnation, so that you that deserve condemnation can get justice without being destroyed, the degree to which you and I can grasp that and take that into kind of the center of our soul, that'll be the degree to which we can become one of those people that everybody else in the city rejoices when they see us. The degree to which you and I take that into the depths of our hearts will turn us into the righteous that the Proverbs talks about. And if we have whole churches filled with people who understand what Jesus has truly done for them, then truly the city will rejoice. The gospel is far more than just getting yourself right with God and then heading off to heaven. It's about participating with God in Jesus and becoming part of their program and mission for doing justice and restoring shalom, knowing that one day in the future, he will establish absolute shalom in this world again. So we're called not to just have people believe in Jesus, although we're called to do that, and we are called to do that, but we're also called to rehabbing homes and visiting folks in nursing homes and so much more. These are the depths and the riches and the glory of the knowledge and wisdom of God that the Proverbs talk about, and it tells us all that those who lay hold of those teachings will be blessed. All right, how do we wrap all this up? Let's wrap it up practically for a moment, a little bit different. We're going to talk over just as a large group, all of us, and then we're going to conclude just praying in small groups to wrap up today. But I thought it would be helpful just as we just take a breath, kind of sit back from the material we just looked at for a minute, and think here for a few moments about some ideas or ways, big or small, where we can give and serve or do justice for others. And interestingly, maybe you've read this Micah 6 scripture before, Micah 6:8, where it asks, what's the Lord's servant to do? He wants us to do three things: do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. When I read that scripture before, walk humbly I understood, love mercy I understood, do justice I never really understood so well. Hopefully after studying it today, you now know what do justice means. And we can do that. So I just thought, maybe what are some things you've done or things you've seen, been inspired by seeing other people do when they're doing justice, just sort of out there, big or small. And I'll kick it off with simply one. I love Christmas carols, and I love singing in small choir groups. And I love the fact that Todd Gilmore always organizes right before Christmas 6 or 8 opportunities to visit nursing homes, to both sing Christmas carols for about an hour concert, and then to visit and provide companionship for the elderly residents in those homes. I love doing that. I love that he does that. That's a small thing. But that's one way to do justice for those folks who are often extremely lonely and unattended to. But yeah, what are some other ideas? Just things that you do or thinking of, you see other people do, ways to do justice. It could be simple or small. Randy.
Educate yourself so you can share with those that are on the same stratosphere as far as income and everything about justice. Because there's so much stuff that we don't know that's not taught in our schools that's available on PBS,
Okay.
all these things about justice. So educating each other.
Okay. Great point. Yeah, another one, Norma.
I work at a food bank. I think we're all aware, especially in Denver County, we're getting a lot of immigrants from Venezuela, Colombia, and part of what I do is work at this food bank where these people are literally in shock that they can get free food in America. And they're like, there's nothing more humbling than giving someone like a loaf of bread.
Mm.
And knowing that I can go to the grocery store and buy whatever I need.
Mm-hmm.
These people really need it. So it keeps me really humble and grateful.
So food bank, refugees, and we probably all heard that a program ended this week in Denver and about 800 families were kicked out. And by the way, as a church, we're helping some of those in that community as a church. But then there are lots of individual people helping as well. Yeah. Brett. Brent. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Total strangers. It could be going down and physically helping, distributing money, whatever, many different ways to contribute to that need. Yeah, some other thoughts, just sort of things out there kind of happening in this regard. Yes?
I'm sure we could all
Emma,
name them,
okay.
but Alex and Carmen Hamilton are my heroes.
Mhm.
Just how much of their time and resources they devote to seeking others' needs out and then helping logistically to help arrange not only for them to help meet those people's needs, but for everybody else too as well.
Yep.
It's a gift, but they spend so much time doing it. It's amazing.
Yep. Yeah, if you're a little stuck on ideas, just talk with them, and there will be a wealth of ways to kind of engage and help do justice. Yeah, a few more.
One of the things
Tim.
that I do down in Houston is I put together these packages with underwear, socks, toiletries, and snacks, a couple bottles of water, give them to those. But then I also give those to people that are begging. But I also will take them over to a restaurant, sit down with them, and eat a lunch with them.
Yeah.
Because they don't get a lot of interaction
Yeah.
with somebody that's in a different
Yeah.
situation. And I buy them lunch and
Sure. So some provisions and material goods, but also just spend some time. Yeah, yeah, engage. Louis.
I think even just asking your neighbors for help, just saying, hey, I need help with my car, can you help me? Or
Mm-hmm.
when you're in a vulnerable state, I remember when our grandmother passed away, and my mother-in-law was home with our girls, and we weren't home, and we asked our neighbors to go check my mother-in-law, and they went over and helped out with the kids, and
Mm-hmm.
that just meant the world to us.
Yeah, yeah.
Having that community where you're opening yourself up,
Right.
to let others help you.
Yeah, sometimes we'll be in a situation at any given moment where we're the one needing help in some avenue, direction, need, and opening up the community to let the community help connect and weave and knit that together in reverse. Yes.
I recently got a new job and took over a team that has a lot of people that are from India, and specifically just had a person start last month that this is their first job ever in the United States and never experienced American culture. And so really just trying to celebrate, looking up all the different holidays and festivals, because Lord have mercy, there's a lot of them. And just letting people have that highlight, helping people to just be seen.
Yeah,
To go
yeah,
along with
it's a
that
good
would
one.
be similarly with like
Yeah.
the ladies in my group, just making sure that again, that they have their times to present and to speak,
Mm-hmm.
make sure that no one interrupts, like that kind of things, like to me that's doing
Yeah.
justice.
I think too, and many more. We'll kind of end this, and we'll just end in some prayer. But all those, many of our kids. I think we had 9 last year go in Hope Volunteer Corps. That's a great way to do something way out. I know others have volunteered on service corps, single service corps. Go and help distribute drugs for 3 or 4 days in a pharmacy. If you're in the medical field or as a nurse, spend an extended weekend there. I think some of you tragically heard the tragic news about Kristen Wolf passing away this week. Those that are rallying to help the family, the kids, other things, that's a way to help and engage. A single brother, a married brother came up to me and had on his heart he's connected with an organization called Kicking Bear that helps orphans. And he's talking about plans to put together a camp and connect and provide mentorship. I mean, there are numerous ways. My wife is phenomenal at this. Like Brent's talking about his wife. She's consistently every week doing multiple things in this regard, calls me higher. The point of all this is sharing these ideas is just get involved. I encourage you to find something both regular and consistent in this regard, but then keep some time and money aside for just the occasional ad hoc one-off. That struck my heart. That opportunity presented itself so that you're available on a moment's notice just to meet something in that regard as well. So now at this point, let's just pray about what all we heard. Maybe pray about the ways that you're already maybe engaged. Pray for your own endurance and compassion to be growing in your abilities and just more and more motivated by Jesus' grace and mercy. Or you're like, man, I'm a little convicted because I'm not doing really much of this at the moment. Pray about some ways to begin doing justice. Ask God to give you the wisdom, the courage, the opportunity, and the motivation to do so. So spend about 5 minutes or so, little group right there where you're sitting. Just offer those prayers up to God for your heart, and then we'll be dismissed and go. I guess we voted 49ers. We'll see how that prediction comes true. All right.